So I guess, when you talked initially about how much, review goes into corporate communications, and, everyone has to sign off before it goes out the door, and basically say you don't have that luxury in politics.
Right.
And I think in the corporate world, they're getting less and less of that luxury. So I guess any tips on how do you, in a very short order, make sure that you're on message and make sure that what you're saying isn't going to come back and bite you later?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that corporate communicators need to focus on is they need to do the preparation. In my view, that every good communications operation has done a lot of work before anything gets out the door. And some of that is education on the issues or the products. Some of that is making sure that you know what your competitors are doing, and understanding the tone in which you'll communicate. So hopefully everyone who walks in the door at Contoso Corporation or whatever it is somebody who's ultimately going to be familiar with the way that they want to communicate, the way that they talk to their customers, the way that they interface with competitors. So the tone is very important, because your shareholders are going to be watching. There are many different ways to research what a company is doing these days, and it's important to be thoughtful in those communications, but responsive at the same time. So hopefully by the time you get to having a conversation on Twitter or on Facebook or anywhere else, you've done a lot of research, you've done a lot of educating of yourself or your staff to make sure that when they utter a sentence, that it's consistent with the message and the tone and the presentation that the company wants to provide to the public, to their customers, to shareholders, to reporters, because all of those lines have blurred. I mean, reporters are going to see the same thing as your competitors, as your customers, more often than not, if you're doing it all in a public-facing forum like Facebook or Twitter.
So what I take away from that is basically we need to prepare our people better and then kind of trust them.
Yeah, you do. It does take a lot of trust, and it takes you empowering your people. Sometimes that you're going to have mistakes that are going to be made, but I think in this sped-up environment where the conversation is ongoing, I think people are going to be a little bit more willing to forgive mistakes that occur, as long as you're honest about them. If you put something out that it doesn't end up being the case, as long as you're honest about, okay, actually this is what the product does, not this, or this is what we think, not that. As long as you're honest about that and keep up that communication, I think people, your customers are going to trust that. But it is necessary to sort of, take the leashes off and trust your people, and hopefully you've given them the tools enough to have those conversations in a meaningful way that benefits them, the customers, and it benefits your company.
So you brought up an example in when you were talking, and it kind of, I think, goes into this theme of where everyone's now part of the conversation. Our employees or our spokespeople or the companies, the reporters. What do you do when maybe as so like in politics as a party, or maybe it's your customers, I guess, in a business scenario where you have a specific messaging, but maybe everyone else doesn't exactly buy off on that. Almost like kind of where the grassroots doesn't really support what's happening at top.
Yeah, that is a difficult scenario, because a lot of times, we would like to think that we control the conversation, or we control what information is being conveyed, but we really don't. We have to respond to it, and conversations, political conversations in particular, really do start at the grassroots level, and they bubble up. They bubble up through various forms of media, whether it's talk radio or in blogs or on social networking sites, and eventually they're in TV and newspapers. But I think, I think you really have to focus on finding out why people think certain things, responding with facts. Was always very important for us at the White House to, if people have very strong feelings about particular issues, trying to enlighten the conversation or bring the conversation along with new facts that maybe hadn't been considered, or putting things, using anecdotes to put things in a different light, finding different ways to tell your story. It's the same story, but finding different ways to convey it in a way that makes sense to people who are already engaged in the conversation is very important. And if you come across as cold or calcitrant or, unwilling to listen, that's when you're going to have a real problem.
Let's see.